I was not interested in going to college. I dropped out of high school halfway through, like 3/4 of the way through my junior year. I just was sort of like, no, I'm done. I didn't want to do my schoolwork anymore. And I really felt like I had gotten what I needed out of it. I definitely scandalized a lot of my friends because they were like, what? You can't do that. I was like, well, I just did.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Anchorage politico Anna Hutchinson. In 2021, she came up to Anchorage to work for her college friend Forrest Dunbar's mayoral campaign. The plan was for her to just be here a few months, but she has stayed on to work on other political campaigns with no thoughts of leaving. Although we set out to discuss strategies for new folks to get involved in local politics, a topic that we eventually get to, we ended up with a very wide-ranging conversation about her unusual childhood in the San Francisco Bay Area, her obsession with Harry Potter, and her time as a director of a domestic violence shelter in rural California. Anna Hutchinson, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Andrew Gray.
You grew up homeschooled, correct?
Yes.
Tell us about being a homeschool girl.
I want to clarify that I was not homeschooled as like, oh, we're a uber religious family that wants prayer in school. Like, I was not that kind of homeschooler. I keep meaning to ask my mom why they decided to homeschool me, and I keep forgetting. But I think it was mostly that she was able to be a stay-at-home parent, and we lived in areas that did not have great public schools.
And you grew up in the Bay Area?
Yes. I mean, we lived in Point Richmond, and then we moved to West Oakland. And this is all, I mean, I remember when Emeryville was created. That was a very big thing. So this is, I like to describe it as very much pre-tech boom Oakland, when people from San Francisco did not come to Oakland because that was like literally the wrong side of the bay.
Wrong side of the bridge.
Yes, wrong side of the bridge, aka not white. So we lived in a warehouse across the street from a concrete factory in West Oakland. From when I was 8 to when I was 12 and a half. And then we moved to a house that my parents actually bought in North Oakland. And that was, I started going to school the second half of 8th grade because we were finally in a neighborhood where there was like a school to go to.
Are you Jewish?
I mean, on a technicality, right? No, my mom was raised Jewish. My dad was raised Catholic. As far as I've experienced, those two have really canceled each other out, and we're all various degrees of heathens, but I also have always grown up aware of the fact that, like, in the 1940s in Germany, I would be considered Jewish enough, and that certainly informs how I think about a lot of things currently happening in the world. But yeah, just on a technicality, never in practice.
And your mom was the primary stay-at-home parent?
My dad was self-employed starting when I was 6. He started a piano moving business, and he always basically worked out of home. Like, that was where his office was, and where he would come back to at the end of the day, park his truck and everything. And my mom was like his business partner, administrative support, like whatever was needed there. But then, yeah, she
answered the phone calls to schedule the pianos to be moved?
I mean, at a certain point, we were able to have someone else do that. And when we lived in the warehouse, like, there was actually an office space in the warehouse where someone would be doing that. But no, she was, I mean, it was, I obviously did not recognize this as a child, but in hindsight, it was an enormous privilege to be able to be homeschooled in a way that was based on, like, how do I as a parent facilitate my children's positive experiences of the world? How do I make sure they get to spend time with their friends and doing new things and going to classes and, like, pursuing whatever interests they have? rather than, some families homeschool in a very rigid, we have a curriculum and we're just doing it at home, kind of like that was not what we were doing. It was, I'm interested in this right now, so I'm going to pursue this. But 6 months later, I'm interested in that, so let's go do that. And, can I have a sleepover with my friend on a Tuesday? Great, let's do it.
Was transitioning to public school halfway through 8th grade jarring?
It was fun. Like, it was like this fun adventure. It was also, I mentioned I had a lot of friends who were older than me, and so they made they started going to school for high school. And so around, 13, I was like, okay, most of my friends are now in school, my closest friends. And, this will be a fun, cool new thing to do. Like, homework, what's that?
And you went to American University in DC for college?
I did. It was one of 2 colleges I applied to and got accepted to.
What was the other one?
Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Oh.
I was not interested in going to college. I dropped out of high school halfway through, like 3/4 of the way through my junior year. I just was sort of like, no, I'm done. I didn't want to do my schoolwork anymore. And I really felt like I had gotten what I needed out of it. I definitely scandalized a lot of my friends because they were like, what? You can't do that. I was like, well, I just did.
So you're like 16 or 17?
I was 16.
And you dropped out, and your parents said...
It was their idea. They said, if you're not going to do your homework, why are you going to school? And
did they say, like, you're going to get a job?
No. I went to England for 5 weeks over the summer and interned for the producer of the Harry Potter movies. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing, right? Like the momentous life experience of my last 8 months is that I was diagnosed with ADHD. And in hindsight, that might explain a lot about my educational trajectory. But at the time I was just like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And so, and then college.
I mean, I just want to stop right there.
Yeah.
So you moved to England and you worked on the Harry Potter movies. I mean, like the average high school dropout, that's not their option. How did that happen?
My mother went to Harvard with the producer of the Harry Potter movies.
Oh.
Yeah.
So did she talk to the producer and like, hey, Anna's working through some things. Do you have something for her?
I have no idea.
Did your mom tell you you can go to England and work on a Harry Potter movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was and it's a really complicated thing because I'm positive it was expensive. And in hindsight, I was totally unequipped to be traveling by myself and making the most of it. And it was just, it was a good experience. It definitely felt like it had some strings attached.
Did you do productive work on the movies?
I did what a book nerd would want to do, which is I worked in the main office, doing administrative stuff, but then also getting to read manuscripts of books and advanced copies of books to potentially flag them as, maybe you'd want to look at this one. I don't think I read anything that has since become a movie. But getting to read manuscripts of books, very cool.
That is cool.
And I met Alan Rickman. I got to shake his hand. He was in full Snape regalia on the set. And David Heyman was like, Alan, this is Anna. Anna, this is Alan. Oh, nice to meet you. And it's
Were you sad when he died?
Yes. Though, one, Harry Potter, very problematic. And two, my love for Alan Rickman goes back to him being Colonel Brandon in Sense and Sensibility.
The best movie ever.
Yeah.
I've watched this so
totally
many times.
predates, whatever.
Yeah. But can we just for a moment touch on the problematic nature of Harry Potter? Because this is an interesting thing. Because I assume you mean because of J.K. Rowling's politics. Mm-hmm. But is there something wrong with the work itself?
I think one part is it's just heavily tainted by her descent into TERFdom, right?
And for our listeners who don't understand, so J.K. Rowling is a
trans exclusionary radical feminist.
So it's a woman who considers herself a feminist, but does not include trans women as being part of the woman community.
Lots of biological essentialism nonsense.
But I guess to get to the point, though, I don't know, like, if that had never come out about her, I mean... Would you see that in the books?
Let's have a conversation about the merits of Harry Potter, because like that will be some contentious shit for your podcast. Can I swear?
You can, and I've never read the Harry Potter books.
Oh my god! But you're gonna have to like. Are you gonna read them with Waylon?
I tried to read the first one with Waylon, and honestly, this is really dumb, but in the very first book, early on, it's like he's with the aunt and uncle who's mistreating him.
The Dursleys.
And they're unattractive. And it bothered me that the mean people are also unattractive people. And I just
And Mr. Dursley and Dudley are both overweight.
There was some... that bothered me. And I...
Totally fair.
And when Waylon wasn't that interested in it, I was like, well... I don't know, it's kind of sending a message that if you're not physically attractive, you're not nice, and I'm okay with stopping the book.
Okay, so here are my Harry Potter hot takes, or at least some of them. One, I am absolutely, I'm 37 now. I am of the sort of Harry Potter generation. Like, I grew up, I read the first 2 books after they came out, but I read the 3rd book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We actually ordered it from Amazon.co.uk. We ordered it from UK Amazon.
So you get it faster?
Yes, because with the 3rd book, they hadn't yet decided to coordinate the release globally. They were still releasing in the UK before they were in the US. And so from that point on, they would come out in the summer. My friends and I would go to the bookstore at midnight. We'd get the new book. I think it was the 5th book, Half-Blood Prince, came out, and we went back to my friend Caitlin's house, and I read out loud until we all fell asleep. Like, that was our way. So it was a huge cultural event, and it was up until the summer. The last book came out the summer before my senior year of college. So, like, truly just spanning...
And you read them all the way through college. Like,
absolutely.
You were the first day.
When Deathly Hallows came out, I read it in 24 hours, and that was like the thing.
And it sounds like these were very positive reading experiences, or you wouldn't have kept going.
Yeah, they're fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I read a lot of books, so like I would say the majority of the books fall into the like, oh yeah, that was fine. But they were a phenomenon. I would argue they are not as good as the phenomenon makes them out to be. Like, ultimately, what J.K. Rowling did was she wrote a classic boarding school story and added magic and, like, puns. And I don't know. My favorite books were always His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. Probably the most formative books for me I ever read. And I remember being, 13, 14 and just so aggravated that everyone was high on Harry Potter. And meanwhile, like most of I'd try to get people to read The Golden Compass and they'd be like, yeah, but Harry Potter. And I was like, no, this book is better. You don't understand. Philip Pullman, of course, has, he's got the same kind of problematic opinions of most old white atheist men. But those books are better. So
yeah, I just saw on social media today that Richard Dawkins, like a whole thing of him talking about trans issues, and it's really disappointing.
It is disappointing, but unsurprising because here's sort of like when I was in college. I mean, and we have to situate this chronologically. I got to college in August of 2004. Obviously, November 2004 was the election when George W. Bush got reelected. The Bush administration overall, I think, really supercharged conversations around evangelical Christians being involved in and influencing American politics. And so college was when I really came into contact with atheism. Like, again, I grew up sort of feeling like, oh, religion is just this thing that people in books have. Like, oh, I'm reading about the Puritans and they're religious and they care about the Bible. Like, that was my sort of sense of it. But I wasn't overtly not religious. I was just like, this is a non-factor.
Right. So how old were you in 2004?
18.
Gotcha.
Right. So in college is when I came into contact with the quote unquote the new atheists. So that's Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, rest in peace, Sam Harris.
Mm-hmm. Richard Dawkins is a British evolutionary biologist, formerly at Oxford. Christopher Hitchens was a British-American journalist. And Sam Harris is an American neuroscientist and philosopher. All three have written best-selling books criticizing religion.
Those are like the main three. There's a third one who I'm forgetting, but he was always way much...
Fourth one, you mean?
Fourth one, yeah, who's less interesting. Anyway, those are the main three. And, like, I will own that I was definitely, like, a shitty atheist for college plus like maybe 2-3 years. Like it was very much part of my identity.
Oh, like you were like an evangelical atheist?
Yeah, and dogmatic about it. And like, I remember what Bill Maher, who, God, he sucks. But he came out with a movie about religion.
Ridiculous or...
I don't remember. I mean, it was such, like, I think the truly interesting thing about all of that conversation around, and the new atheist conversation coming out at that time, was it really was in reaction to George W. Bush and evangelical Christians in politics.
Right. And there was the whole thing of it also, like, somehow, at least with Bill Maher, being, like, super Islamophobic.
Yes. And so it became so virulent that it became Islamophobic and anti-feminist. And sort of what happened for me is...
Which, to me, just seems so incredibly
There
incongruous.
were scandals. I mean, this is back in the day of, like, blogs. Mm-hmm. There were scandals of, like, women atheists going to atheist conventions or whatever and having what we would now call Me Too experiences that then got shut down by Dawkins or whoever. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I don't remember the particulars, but I remember when this was happening and being like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this, but okay. And then I remember in my mid-20s really having the realization that whether or not someone is an atheist does not determine whether or not they respect me as a person and as a woman. And I remember thinking to myself very clearly, I would rather be in solidarity with like a devoutly Islamic woman than with these sort of like bigoted atheist men. Like my mid-20s was really like, okay, atheism no longer, like I am an atheist, but it's no longer the most important thing. And it was sort of like, then I sort of went through being a shitty feminist. And now I like to think I've all kind of leveled out.
Well, define that.
Shitty feminist, I was just angry. So angry, like about so many, I mean, and I think this is something that people have to go through in their mid to late 20s when you're forming your identity, or your frontal lobe is finally done growing so you can like figure out who you are. But it was just, you know, if you really let yourself, you can be mad about something every day, multiple times a day. I mean, I would assume that it is also possible for this to be true for people who are gay, people who are trans. Like, if you let yourself, you can find so much in the world that that is so hateful and so mean and cruel that you can spend all your time being furious and just not knowing where to point that fury. And that's kind of how I felt, was like, especially, you know, coming to terms with like men who I had been friends with for years, just kind of being disappointing. And 10 years later, I might have been able to handle that differently. But like, I ended some friendships because I was just like, this is unacceptable to me that you
cheated on your girlfriend. Like,
no, not even like that. It was someone who I'd been friends with for a very long time. He had a crush on a woman that I was friends with, and he sent me a text message. He said, well, so-and-so officially friend zoned me. And I wrote back to him, I was like, hey, like, friend zone, don't, like, that's not a good way to put this, because it implies that like being friends with a woman is somehow inferior to having a romantic relationship, blah, blah. And like months later, he sent me this whole thing. Oh, like you may have noticed I haven't been in touch very much. And it's because, I was sharing my feelings of being rejected and you made it about this and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh my God. And I think I never responded. And I was just like, nope, I'm not going to be part of this. And every now and then I'm like older me could have handled that differently. But at the time, I was just like, I don't want to put up with this shit. Like, I don't want to have to explain to you or justify to you why this feels hurtful to me when you imply that like being friends with me is not as good.
Because you're in the friend zone. And
I mean, ostensibly. Right. And I'm like, what? Like, this is somehow lesser than like if we were sleeping together? Like, so, and I remember a friend of mine coming to visit me, like talking about something and her being like, you seem really angry.
Well, I could speak for me in my late 20s. I think there was something satisfying about being angry.
Yeah.
And also being extraordinarily judgmental of people who aren't angry because they're not paying attention.
They don't understand. They don't care as much. I mean, truly, I think it is like a formative experience and like hopefully you come out on the other side of it with some perspective. That is not the case for everybody. I like to think it's the case for me, and that was one of the really interesting things about moving to Redding in Shasta County and suddenly going from truly living in all of these very liberal bubble communities to living in a deeply not liberal community, right?
Yeah, so for our listeners who may not know
Redding, let's give some context.
What's Redding? Tell us about Redding.
Redding is the county seat of Shasta County, California.
This is Northern California.
This is rural, inland Northern California. I always tell people, like, no, this is the part of California. This is not what you're thinking of when you think California. And this is also, ironically, not what the right wing is talking about when they say, oh, you want to make us into California, right?
They would love to make us into Redding.
Absolutely. One of the most hilarious things to me is when people, I actually have like since hidden my like hometown information on Facebook, but like when Facebook trolls would come at me and be like, go back to California. And I'm like, buddy, yeah, I've lived in like the Bay Area, but I've also lived in other places of California and you do not understand. No, Redding is a town of about 89,000 people, out of a county that is 180,000. So it's small, in terms of population, very large in terms of land mass. And there are parts of it that I think the federal government deems frontier. Like it's not even rural. It's even more rural than rural. I feel like I'm making that like rural juror joke from
30 Rock.
Yeah. But it's deeply conservative. And so the real learning experience of being there, and I worked at a domestic violence and rape crisis center there, was realizing that I could not be a purist about who I was working with. I mean, there were Trump supporters on our board of directors, which don't ask me what kind of mental gymnastics you have to do to be supporting Donald Trump and also be like, yeah, I'm a champion for assaulted women, but they were doing it. And I learned to take the approach of like, well, I hate everything about what you think about all these things, but we're on the same team in this moment. So let's go do it.
Hey, that's politics.
I guess, man. I mean, ultimately I was too liberal for them anyway, but it was a really good experience, I think, because it makes it impossible to keep that purity.
Tell us about how you got the job there, why you moved there, what the job entailed.
In Redding?
Yeah.
I mean, I had been living in Mount Shasta, which is about 45 minutes north. That's where I moved back to when I moved back to California, because that's where my parents now live. And at the time I was doing sales for a solar company and they wanted to open a satellite office in Redding. So I moved down to Redding to do that because I had broken up with a guy. And when you break up with a guy, I'm sure there are lots of people in Alaska who can relate to this. Mount Shasta is a town of 3,600 people. when you've been dating someone who grew up there and like their kindergarten teacher is still like when they are that embedded in the community, at a certain point you have to just be like, nope, you get to keep the city in your divorce. Like, yeah. I'm leaving. So it was very much like, no, I don't want to be here anymore. And then moving to Reading was like moving to the big city, because it's like, oh, from 3,600 to 89,000 people. There's actual organizations here to get involved with. So I got involved with the domestic violence rape crisis shelter as a volunteer. Like any good nonprofit, they're chronically understaffed. So it was very easy for me to then parlay that into a abysmally paid $13 an hour job. Took a pay cut to go work there because I was like, I really want to do this work. But yeah, $13 an hour at age 30 is gives you a good window into why millennials are traumatized. I was the crisis hotline and volunteer coordinator for a year, quickly able to be promoted again, chronically understaffed. So if you can stick it out.
Because they can't pay. I mean. Because
they can't pay. And also, I mean, the work is hard, right? Like the work is very hard. So I became the shelter manager. So I oversaw our 24-hour emergency shelter. And then, I don't know, like a year and a half, 2 years after that, I became the client services director. So I oversaw all of the direct services being provided on-site, off-site, all of it.
Can you tell like a typical story of like somebody coming in, how long they stay, where they go?
It's complicated because technically everything's supposed to be confidential, but I can tell you like my proudest sort of client supporting role I played for someone was, there was a woman who, even before I started working there, she was like known to the organization.
Like a frequent flyer.
Yes. Chronically needing services. To the point that like staff had remembered when like, oh, this kid was a baby and now they're, 8 or whatever. Anyway, mom, 6 children, chronically abusive relationship, and
always going back to the same man.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Father of the children. Cause I mean, I think people underestimate how parents, mothers particularly, but parents overall will put up with a lot to be able to sort of say, oh, but at least my kid is getting a 2-parent upbringing, right? Because we've really socialized ourselves to think that is the way. But I remember in like January, she came in, she only stayed one night, and then she left. And you have to understand, every time someone came into the shelter, it was a whole production, because it's like, we got to make sure the room is ready. We got to get it all, like, we make it all nice. We put like affirmations on the mirrors and like make sure there are supplies. So for someone to come in and then leave after one day, it's like, okay, now we got to like clean it all over again.
What would be like a recommended stay, or like what would be an appreciated stay?
I mean, the max stay was typically meant to be anywhere between 30 and 90 days to make it, emergency shelter. But so she came for one day, and then...
With all 6 kids?
With all 6 kids. And then a week or 2 later she came, and she stayed like 2 or 3 nights. And then I remember there was one time I was 45 minutes north at my parents' house, and I got a call on the crisis hotline on like a regular Saturday. And she was on the phone, and she was like, I don't know what to do. I'm in the parking lot, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, look, I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to come down there. We're going to get you back into the shelter. Because I was in charge, so I could just be like, nope, I don't care. This is inconvenient. We're going to do this. So she came in again. I remember there was one stay where she actually said to me, like, oh, I stayed a whole week. And I was like, I'm so proud. Like, this is great, right? Because you really have to take the perspective of whether it's one night or 1 week or 1 month or whatever. It's like, okay, that is that amount of time where you and your children are taking a rest from whatever traumatic experiences are occurring in the home. So that was always my perspective. And at a certain point, it'd be like all of a sudden she stayed. She stayed long term. And there was other stuff that went on that was very challenging. That I won't get into for confidentiality reasons, but since then, we are friends on Facebook. After she left the shelter, she got to go into transitional housing that we had a grant for, so we were able to get her into her own house with all of her kids. And since then, she has been stably housed. She's finished community college. She got her community college nursing degree. She's now in a Bachelor of Science nursing program. She's just starting. I just saw a post that she was like, I've got all my stuff. She is thriving, and it is so cool. And the part, I hate when advocates take a lot of credit for what the people actually doing the work are doing. Like, I didn't do that for her. I didn't bestow this on her. But what I did that I feel very strongly is so important is that I did not hold it against her that she was coming and going and coming and going. I didn't look at it and go, oh, well, you don't really want this situation.
You didn't roll your eyes and be like, here you are again.
And like, real talk, other people at the organization did. Like, because again, remember, I'm like working in this relatively conservative community. So even like progressive, I'm doing air quotes for your listeners, even progressive people were like kind of retro in their approach to this. Like, so there were times
like,
where
we don't want to expend resources on you.
Yes.
Because we know you're going to go straight back to him.
Because you're not taking this seriously.
And this is going to happen again.
Yep. And so, like, yeah, the thing that I did was I insisted and I went out of my way to make sure that she and her kids felt like they could always come back. And yeah, she's fucking thriving. It's awesome. Now, is it true that for every one of those people, there's like dozens of people that where the system fails and like things don't work out? Absolutely. But
it's a success story.
It's very cool. It is very cool.
Get us from there to Alaska.
The sort of short version is I've known Forrest Dunbar for almost 18 years, right?
Because y'all went to American University.
We overlapped at American University together. We actually met in Oakland. We did not meet in DC at school. We met in Oakland on winter break because I was walking on Shattuck Avenue and I saw this person and I was like,
he goes to school with me.
Don't you go to American? He was like, oh yeah. He asked if I was a graduate student, which I thought was hilarious because I was 19. He'll tell you it was because I was wearing a beret. I have never worn a beret in my adult life. But anyway.
Was he visiting grandparents?
Yeah, family. So yeah, we just happened to overlap. And like, I kind of knew who he was because he's Forrest Dunbar.
So he's the same year as you?
2 years ahead.
Okay, and he was like a big deal on American University? People knew who he was?
I worked in the Office of Merit Awards. That was my federal work study placement. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it will come to surprise anybody that the Office of Merit Awards was a place where Forrest Dunbar was known. Right?
Because he got Merit Awards.
Yes. Anyway, suffice to say, my path from Reading to Alaska, I've known Forrest for a very, very, very long time.
So you met him on the street that day, and did y'all like start hanging out, just start talking?
We were just, I honestly don't know how we became and stayed good friends because we rarely lived in the same time zone, let alone the same city. Yeah. We just stayed in touch. A lot of our friendship is based on like co-managing fantasy football teams together back before I gave up on football. But like things like that. So, when Forrest was running for mayor, he asked me, he was like, come up to Anchorage, work for my campaign.
And had you worked on campaigns before?
Nope. Come up to Anchorage, work on my campaign. You're going to learn a lot. And then you can go back to Reading and you can run campaigns against these like demonstrably terrible politicians who are.
Oh, okay. So I get it. So he was like trying to help, change the politics of Reading in some small way.
I think it was intended to be a mutually beneficial arrangement. And also like I had a life in Reading. So like when I moved up here, it was supposed to be temporary. I own a house in Reading. I had been with my partner for more than 3.5 years. He didn't want to come up here because he likes to stay there. And I was like, great, I'm just going to go up here. I'm going to do this. And then I decided to stay. And
so did you like doing campaign work? I mean, that first campaign?
Yeah. Here's the thing. I've liked almost everything I've ever done. Which again, like kind of speaks to the ADHD of it all. I'm like, ooh, this is new and exciting. And it aligns very well with the skills I learned, doing sales and doing mission-driven nonprofit work, and customer service. Like it's all the same skill set. And I do think it's really interesting how we mythologize campaign work. Like it's this like, oh my God, you've got to be invited to like do this really important hard work. And it's like, I remember a friend of mine, I think she like tweeted this or something. She was like, more women specifically need to understand that if you've like organized a bake sale, you can be a fundraiser for a campaign. Like it's not actually that mysterious, but I think there is sort of all this.
So let's say that there's a listener out there who has never been involved in a campaign before, has a desire to be a part of a campaign for the first time. I mean, how does that person get started?
It's funny because like the one answer is like volunteer. First of all, the unfortunate reality is that like most down ballot campaigns are going to struggle to maintain a good volunteer program. So your experience might not be great there.
Because you may not have a volunteer coordinator. There may not be
You're almost certainly not going to have a dedicated volunteer coordinator. And then on the federal side, they're going to have so many people offering to volunteer that like you're just never going to hear from anyone. I've had that experience where I've been like, yeah, pick me. No.
It's like, and you need something in the middle where they have enough volunteers to teach you.
Well, it's almost like
but not too many.
You don't even need like it. I think it starts with, in an ideal world, it starts with social connection rather than actual taking action, right? Like it starts with, I'm thinking of now Assemblywoman Anna Brawley. And she was able to do this in part because of her job at the time. But in the first month that I was up here, Forrest was like, hey, this person wanted to like do a Zoom call with me to talk about the mayor's race. I don't really know what we're going to talk about. Why don't you sit in? And that conversation was with Anna Brawley. And from that conversation, a connection, like she and I were like, oh, we have the same first name. Let's be friends. And, in that way, it was not transactional so much as just part of the conversation. So, I think that's the ideal way. But of course, most people are not going to have the balls to just say, hey, candidate, give me some of your time.
Right. Well, and I also think once you're kind of in the bubble, it's like all of a sudden, all of your friends work on campaigns. All of your friends are following it.
Are you speaking of yourself, Andrew?
I mean, I would say that happened.
Oh, 100%.
It 100% happened accidentally.
Well,
and
you add Alaska Twitter into the mix, and it's like you never have to hear about anything else. You can just all politics all the time.
So, I guess showing up at events, I guess we're kind of answering the question. You need to show up. You don't need to go to a fundraiser necessarily because you need to be there to give money if you don't have any money to give, but you need to go so you can meet the other people who are working on this campaign.
Or not even working on the campaign, but who are just adjacent and
so that you can shadow somebody.
You need to meet person A who knows person B, and then person B is friends with this person. And it really comes down, this is not a very eloquent or encouraging answer. Cause truly the boilerplate answer is sign up to volunteer or make a donation. And those things are great, especially donations, but neither of those are going to foster the same kind of connection where you want to be able to not only volunteer, but then have people to talk to about what it was like volunteering, or you want to make a donation and be able to say, I just made a donation to this person and know people who care.
What's the best way for those people giving time to have an impact?
I mean, I think on the one hand, it's less like what's the actual action and more like be patient with the campaign team. Like, don't take it personally if you reach out and the campaign team doesn't immediately respond to you. Like, you can safely assume they are working on things and that it is not...
Or if they don't have something for you to do today.
If they don't have something for you to do today, I think the other thing is like, everybody's ready to sign up to do a text bank. You don't actually need that. You don't need like dozens and dozens of people to send text messages, because the way it exists is like one person can send 2,000 if they want to. And so, yeah, like don't take it personally when the thing you want to do is not the thing that's needed. And then also really over communicate and like follow up. Like, I guess it comes down to kind of the same thing. Like, understand that campaigns, and again, I'm talking really specifically about down ballot campaigns because that's
underfunded, understaffed, super stressed,
just under-resourced in a way that sucks, and I wish was better, and I hope continues to get better. But it is not personal. I've seen comments on social media and like whatever, Twitter is not the real world, but people being like, oh, I reached out to so-and-so and like they never got back to me. So like, why would I ever? And it's like, well, you are taking this very personally. Guaranteed it is not about you.
Because you are not a door knocker.
Yeah. And for me, it's like door knocking. One part of it is like sort of latent anxiety of being a woman knocking on people's doors. Like there's no real basis for that anxiety. I don't think. Like it's very specific to me. And I don't want to say that in a way that discourages people or,
I don't know. I think that
I think it's reasonable.
I think it's reasonable for anyone to have anxiety about door knocking alone.
Particularly post 2016.
So I think, I think door knocking in pairs is, yes, it's taking up 2 volunteers, but it is safer. I door knocked alone, but I usually had a driver. I had somebody who sat in a car and read a book.
Yeah.
So there was somebody with me.
And I think that is the way to go, because if you look at it from the perspective of the voter whose door you're knocking on, 2 people showing up at your door can feel kind of aggressive, and it becomes harder to have a more authentic conversation with them. So it's like this tricky balance of how do you feel safe as the door knocker without putting off the person you're trying to talk to.
Another thing is that you do that side of the street and I do this side of the street at the same time, and we meet at the end. So then you are actually covering twice as much ground, twice as fast, and there is a safety component that
100%.
Another door knocker is a few houses away.
And this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say that like campaign work is sort of behind these curtains, because where is the accessible source of information that says what you just said?
Right.
Like where...
Well,
and I'm sure you could like the National Democratic Training, whatever, NDTC, whatever it is. Like there are these websites that if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, I know, but also you don't want to do that. You've decided to volunteer for somebody this Saturday, and you don't want to like go online and look for trainings. But here's what I'm going to say to listeners, because this was a big like eye opener for me about down ballot races. Mm-hmm. There would be like volunteer for some candidate Wednesday night Zoom 6 p.m. Mm-hmm. And I would show up expecting there to be like 50 people on the call, and there would be no one there except for the outreach person. There would be one person, and you're the only volunteer that showed up. So you need to prepare yourself for that and be okay with that.
And then, like, enjoy being that volunteer person or the campaign staff's, like, favorite person in the world, because it is excruciating to be like, I'm going to host volunteers. And I say that this is not specific to campaigns. Like, this was true in, working at the DV shelter, because I do these, like, monthly volunteer meetings. The like, question of, is anyone actually going to show up? Awful. And then someone does, and you're like, oh my God, it was all worth it.
Right. Well, hey, we're getting towards the end of our time. A couple of questions. One.
No, let's keep talking.
One. So are you committed to staying in Alaska? Do you have a long-term plan for staying in Alaska, or?
Every time I have said, oh yeah, this is definitely the place where I'm going to live for the rest of my life.
You move the next year.
Not necessarily the next year, but I move eventually. But I will say, like, a big part of Alaska's appeal, like, there are two ways I sort of describe myself. If I'm feeling funny, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a dreaded California transplant, right? Like, oh God, another Californian in Alaska. But the real sobering truth is that I do feel like an early stage climate refugee. Like the world is on fire, but the American West is particularly on fire. And
concerned about where water is going to come from.
The
constant anxiety.
Droughts are real. Los Angeles exists in a place where, quite frankly, it should never have been possible to build a city that with that size of a population. Like, it is entirely dependent on water diverted from elsewhere.
Colorado. And
Northern California. Like, this is... It's unsustainable. We didn't really talk about this, but I have had the experience of living through the Carr Fire, Carr Fire in 2018. That was terrifying. Like, I meet people up here who are like, oh no, Alaska, Anchorage, we get wildfires too. It is not the same. I guarantee it. Like, this was, we could see fire on the hill, like, out the window of the shelter, and we had police saying, yeah, you need to evacuate, and then just sort of not being able to access that part of the city for days. And then when the pandemic started, we actually had N95s on hand at the shelter because we had them because the air was so unbreathable for at least 6 weeks after this fire, right? So I don't ever want to be part of that again. It's really pretty depressing to watch the area that I grew up in just become uninhabitable. Like, it is happening. And so now when I think about, is Alaska the long-term plan, I'm sort of like, I don't know where else I would go.
Probably not Phoenix.
Absolutely not. But, like, truly, like, I don't know where I would go that would be viable from a climate perspective and affordable from any perspective, right? Because that's the two parts of it. Not that Anchorage is particularly affordable, but at least it's not 120 degrees in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Next question. You are a big reader. Do you have a book or two you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh God. I was like, Andrew's going to ask me about books. You recommended
a book to me that I never read. Do you want to recommend that one? Do you remember?
I think I know what it is, and it's probably what I was going to say is I'm mad that I had the thought, I need to go look at my Goodreads to remind myself what I've read in the past year, and I did not do that. But so first book that I will recommend, just apropos of the conversation about climate refugees in the American West, is Cadillac Desert. And the author I'm drawing a blank on. But
I'll Google it and put it in.
It is a classic. It is Cadillac Desert. It's about water in the American West. There were the water wars in California were real. Great book. And then I think PBS did a mini series if you're feeling like you don't want to read a whole book. The book I probably recommended to you is called Soundings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Soundings, Journey in the Company of Whales by Doreen Cunningham, which absolutely the sleeper hit of everything I read last year. I only borrowed it from the library. It was on the Libby app. It had a picture of a whale on the cover, and I was absolutely a whale girl growing up. Like, I adopted whales, that kind of thing. So I was like, ooh, a whale. And then the description mentioned an Alaska connection. And it is just such a it's a memoir that is one part about the author taking her 2 or 3 year old son on a trip from Baja, California, all the way up the West Coast to Alaska, following the migration of whales. And then also her reflecting on time maybe 10 years prior in 2007 when, as a journalist for the BBC focusing on climate and the environment, she got like a fellowship. She got money to go to Alaska, specifically to Utqiagvik, to look at sort of the impacts of climate change on Indigenous people. And she ends up forming a really deep relationship with one of the whaling families there. And yeah, it's just this beautiful book about motherhood and grief and climate collapse and whales and Indigenous culture in Alaska. And it was fantastic. I've been recommending it to everybody for the past year, including you. So you should go read it.
I should. Hey, thank you so much for being on today. It was a lot of fun.
You're welcome. I'm sorry I talk so much.
The 1986 book Cadillac Desert, just recommended by our guest Anna Hutchinson, is written by Mark Reisner. Big thank you to Maya Narong for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com. That's East Anchorage Book Club, all one word, no punctuation, @gmail.com.